Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. He's back again. We've talked about JFK, RFK. We've talked about the whole gambit, LBJ, Vietnam. Now we're here to talk about the relationship between RFK and LBJ. I want to get your opinion, Mr. Moretta, but before we do that, I would like you to introduce yourself to everyone out there listening who hasn't heard your past episodes.
Sure. Well, we've done this so many times. If they don't know me by now, we're in trouble, man. No, I'm John Moretta. I'm a professional historian. I've been with Houston Community College for a long time, 43 years. I've also taught at the University of Houston, main campus, a variety of history courses. I have a Ph.D. in history from Rice University. I've written several books and articles on a wide range of topics in U.S. history. And my most recent focus is on the 1960s uh, and counterculture and the new SDS, New Left, student radicalism, anti-war movements. So my current book, which I sent off the final chapters today to my publisher, to Bloomsbury, um, talks about the counterculture and New Left movement, student radicalism in Austin, Texas, which was very unique compared to the East Coast, West Coast kind of domination of historical scholarship. And so it's time to look at other regions of the country, like UT, which had one of the largest SDS chapters in the country by 1966, over 200 members. Anyway, so that's my background, and let's have our conversation, Robbie.
I wanted to talk more about the relationship between RFK. We've kind of talked about LBJ, his presidency, a different opinion than probably a lot of JFK researchers have on LBJ. And like I said, I've grown more about understanding LBJ just through the phone calls and what he's been dealing with and a lot of stuff that I think a lot of people miss out on because when they study the JFK assassination, they strictly just want to look at him as an enemy. I think he was a brute guy, but I also think he did some good things when it came to civil rights and other things. But there was always this conversation that happened where the Kennedys hated LBJ, and it's like I don't know. I think some of it can be verified, but the strictly with Bobby. Um, but from a lot of things I've seen and conversations I've seen, I definitely think there was animosity, but I honestly can't tell who started it. Maybe it was LBJ by not selecting RFK as a VP candidate, and he had to kind of try and find a way to smooth it over with other people, calling Dean Russ, telling him, I have to say, I'm not choosing you as VP either because I got to make sure it doesn't look like I'm just targeting Bobby. And Dean's like, that's fine. I didn't want it anyway. And like, there's a lot of people giving these responses, and Bobby seemed like the one that really took it to heart. And Dean Russ called him and said, I think Bobby's going to retaliate. And there became this whole thing later where you start seeing press stories about LBJ's finances and all these things start getting printed about. And everyone's trying to figure out who's leaking this information, who would have they talked to get that information, and all fingers end up from everybody pointing back at RFK. Again, I don't, like I said, that's from what I'm seeing in the LBJ library. I want to get your kind of understanding of RFK's relationship and who RFK was, but also the relationship with LBJ.
Sure. When you look at that particular relationship dynamic, and without question, there was never any love lost between the two. And you can trace the origins of their animosity, which reaches a crescendo in 68, okay, back to JFK's having LBJ run on his ticket in 1960. If there was one voice within the Kennedy circle, and that circle was a very tightly closed circle, as you know, and I'm sure many of your listeners do, they were horrified by JFK's selection of LBJ to run. If you look at that relationship, JFK and LBJ, so if the Democratic Convention, once JFK sews up the nomination, then the big issue becomes who will be his VP, right, running mate. And he is presented by the Democratic establishment, right? A list of names: Adlai Stevenson, uh, Humphrey, Rusk, Democratic Party stalwarts, right? LBJ, JFK is very uncomfortable with all of them. No, no, no. This guy, no, no. Adelaide's a two-time loser, etc. Well, Larry O'Brien and other real shrewd Democratic political operatives say, okay, Mr. President, you're good in the Northeast. Okay. You can take the South. You've proven you've absolved yourself of the issue of being Catholic. He did a remarkable job with that in Houston, etc., at the Baptist Convention. But still, most consider you to be a Yankee civil rights guy, which he wasn't. But so we need to balance the ticket, Mr. President. All right, you're part of the Eastern patrician establishment, the Democratic Party establishment, which is Eastern dominated still. We need to get the Southwest. We need to get the West. Now, Nixon's from California, so Nixon's going to take California in 60. But we got to counter that with the next biggest state in the West, electoral votes, Texas. And that's what O'Brien and a few others say. How about Lyndon Johnson? You just beat him in the primaries, right? Let's bring him back into the fold. He's crucial. He's the most powerful senator in the Senate in United States history. He would be a great boon to you, helping with your legislative agenda. Anyone knows how to get legislation through Congress, House and Senate, this man, no one does it better. Well, what O'Brien and the others throw Johnson out there as their shrewd choice, Bobby has a shit fit. Oh my God, that hillbilly Texan, racist. Johnson was no racist. Bobby just went ballistic, right? Johnson knew that the Kennedy circle, very few liked him. They might have respected him, feared him, but genuine like or friendship, forget it, man. And if there's anyone in that inner circle that just, I don't want to say despised Johnson, but loathed Johnson, it was Bobby. We got documentation coming out of the wazoo on that. Okay. LBJ knew this. He knew it. Right? But LBJ, being ambitious, hoping for the White House, accepted the nomination. And it paid great political dividend. Kennedy won Texas, a few other border states. Right? Didn't win the Deep South. But he picked up enough of the southern states to carry him to victory. Everybody knows he won pretty handily in the Electoral College. That's the game. But you look at the popular vote, it's 110,000, which is nothing. It's like, wait a minute. So he barely wins. And Richard Daley, of course, helped him win. And others. Daley wasn't alone. Kennedy becomes president. As vice president, sadly, John Kennedy, never really used Johnson to his fullest potential within his administration. Sad, but true. Kennedy had Johnson on the ticket. I said it paid the dividend. Took some crucial states, most importantly, Texas. But as vice president, I mean, as John Nance Carter said, that's a job that's not worth a bucket of warm spit. You've heard that cliche before, right? John Nance Garner was one of FDR's vice presidents, a Texan as well. And no, the vice president really doesn't do much, right? And which is sad. But and Obama, in my historical memory, in my historical time, Obama was one of the few presidents who really had Biden do a lot, right? Because Biden was a a legislative master, more so than Obama, right? Obama was only one-term senator, man. But if you look back at the history of the vice presidency, very few presidents, we've had what, 47 now, have really used their vice president the way he or she should be, right? Look at Biden with Kamala Harris. Us Democrats were certain she'd be in the limelight, right? Biden would serve one term, and during his one term, he would groom Harris to be his successor. Biden didn't do that, which I think hurt Kamala in 2024. Go back to Kennedy. He had the greatest legislative mind as his vice president. With if had he used Johnson to his fullest capacity as a legislative guru, a lot of that new frontier legislation would just flown off and been implemented, passed. But he didn't. And the reason he did it is because LBJ was shut out by Kennedy's inner circle. Bobby, Sorensen, Donald, Bundy. McNamara had a good relationship with Johnson even before Johnson became president. Rusk did. George Ball, kinda. Doug Dillon, not really. Stevenson, no. They're all part of that highbrow, blue blood patrician establishment. And they always looked down on Johnson as this hill country hillbilly from Central Texas who went to Texas State University and became a school teacher. And so he was never brought into that inner circle, which is a shame. Johnson hoped to parlay his acceptance as VP to be the heir apparent, that JFK would serve his 2 terms, step down, pass the torch to Johnson, who remained loyal to JFK beginning to end. He never was disloyal, never talked behind Kennedy's back, never gossiped. He knew of all of Kennedy's affairs, all the women, the philandering. He knew all about that, right? If there was someone within the Johnson circle who didn't want LBJ, I got my grandson visiting from Dubai, so I had to give him his little night monitor. Sorry. If there was someone who did not want LBJ to become vice president, it was his wife, Lady Bird. Lady Bird was not keen on it. They're going to use you. You're going to be laughed at, ridiculed as the Texas hick cowboy from the hill country. Lady Bird was not happy. But she was the great political wife, and he took the job. And Kennedy rarely, if ever, really used this incredible asset he had as vice president, right? Like I said, very few presidents do. I think Obama, I hate to be redundant, but thinking back, Obama was one of the few presidents in my historical time who really chose a vice president for political reasons, obviously Biden, but a guy who had great knowledge. Remember, he's been in the Senate since he was 32 years old, Biden. Well, the same thing could be said of LBJ. This guy was the master of the Senate. Very few senators in the history of the United States since 1788, right, were as dominated Senate as masterfully as Johnson. I mean, for every Henry Clay, you got a bunch of nid-nods. You got Lyndon Johnson. If you look at the senators we had, like in the 1840s, like Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, these guys, even John C. Calhoun, these guys were powerful men. And Johnson was in his own time, and others. Richard Russell, we've talked about. So I feel bad for Johnson in a sense that he was never used to his fullest capacity, and he knew that. Look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. Was LBJ at the table? No. No, I think he had sent him off to India on some kind of goodwill tour of South Asia. Jesus Christ, this is one of the most serious crises of the entire Cold War, and your vice president is on the other side of the world? That's insulting. That's harmful.
Did Johnson treat RFK with animosity once he became president? It seemed like he respected a lot of, well, it seemed like he respected some of the things that Bobby wanted, but he also wasn't trying to listen to Bobby 24/7, bring up things about civil rights and other things. Again, Johnson's more focused on domestic press and dealing issues like that.
Yeah. And when it came to civil rights, Bobby, during JFK's administration, was Attorney General. Bobby's civil rights record is questionable at best. He was no big fan of the protest. And this is King, right? He did not offer much help from the Justice Department. He was always telling King, look, don't provoke Southern whites. I don't want to have to intervene. The Kennedy record, JFK, Bobby Kennedy record, is not as wonderful as people think. It is a myth. It is I'll say a farce to credit JFK with civil rights. You know this. That's going to be Johnson, right? When JFK is killed, LBJ becomes president, and we've talked about this before, I think. Johnson really didn't beg, but he exhorted and pleaded with as much of the Kennedy cabinet to stay with him, at least for his first year. Okay? The only one that didn't was guess who?
Bobby.
Bobby. And that's when that rift really escalates. Russ stays throughout the entire time. McNamara stays. Most of those guys stayed least into 64, least into LBJ's massive victory in 64. And most will stay his entire administration, right? Key players. Bobby leaves 64, right? Just before the election, goes to New York, runs for senator, and wins handily. Now he's Senator Robert Kennedy. He'll be in New York for 2 years, residency and all that. And in 1966, Bobby runs for the open Senate seat. Boom, wins handily. This really concerned LBJ. And that's not Kennedy, who's Attorney General within the cabinet. Now this is Senator Robert Kennedy, who can do irreparable damage in the Senate opposing Johnson's agenda. So, no. And if you go back and listen to some of the phone conversations soon after Bobby wins in 66, the Senate seat from New York, Johnson tells his inner circle buddies, Ross Dow, John Connally, and others in Texas, this guy's going to make my life miserable. I just know it. And LBJ, I forgot who he was talking to. Was it Conley? Russell? Shit, I forgot who he was talking to. McPherson?
Just say what he said. I'll probably know who you're talking about.
Yeah, he will tell them early on because by 66, the war's starting to heat up. We're escalating big time. And he forgot who he tells, but he tells them that if anybody's going to come out and try to crucify, I'm paraphrasing, try to crucify me on this issue, on the war issue, it's going to be Bobby Kennedy. LBJ knew, and I forgot who the conversation was. Well, it was a couple of conversations. God damn, I'm so sorry. I'm getting old, buddy. Um, that Kennedy will use the war to attack him, to go after him. Does Johnson believe Kennedy has White House and Bobby has White House ambitions? Yes. In fact, he tells someone again, I can't remember who it was, that the moment he became senator, was elected senator from New York, LBJ told somebody that he's going to run for president. He's going to challenge me. He's going to try to deny me re-election in 68. He was correct, but he didn't know that it would actually happen. He was surprised. I mean, he wasn't surprised. So he feared Senator Kennedy more than any other because he knew that Kennedy hated him.
Well, if
And
you know the
Johnson,
bitter aspect of RFK, he was very vindictive and he was very pursuitful in his efforts of going after whoever he wanted to go after, and I believe that didn't stop. I appreciate RFK more than I do with JFK, just because I probably would have loved to see that guy be president. He probably would have got a lot of amazing things done. But just when you look at the whole matter in context, I mean, releasing press stories, RFK had influence with certain polls and things like that to help distort things that Johnson was coming across in press stories. I actually have a couple things I'm going to be pulling up here. What you mentioned about the whole Kennedy administration viewing Johnson a certain way, Malcolm Kilduff gave a great explanation on it. He also gave a great explanation on not using Johnson to his fullest capabilities, for lack of a better term. Another one about LBJ and Robert McNamara on 11365, which was I've always supported Kennedy. And he talks about his loyal support. I've been nothing but loyal to Kennedy. To back up what you were saying is what I was looking up on the computer while you were mentioning those things. But also, Malcolm Kilduff stated it was Robert Kennedy that said he needed to be sworn in on Air Force One immediately. It was Robert Kennedy's.
you want the transition to be immediate.
Yeah.
Political leaders always fear that when there's assassinations, traumatic as that, they want to see continuity. They want to see everything's okay, everything's going to be okay. So there's no hesitation there. That's you have to do that right away, right away. And so,
But do you believe Bobby would be so vindictive enough to go after LBJ through the press?
oh God, yes, God, yes. When Bobby decides, I think we talked about this one another time, but it's a good time to talk about this. In 67, that's the year of massive escalation. That's the kind of pinnacle of escalation in Vietnam. The war has come to consume politics. Nothing else matters by 67 but the Vietnam War. It has affected every aspect of American life, every American in varying degrees. It is starting to obliterate Johnson's Great Society programs, his vision for the country. And so the war becomes the central campaign issue in 64, 68, even with the Republicans, with Nixon. The war is the issue, right? Okay, there's more than just it. The war is the central issue, and all the other issues, problems that the Republicans will exploit, crime, law and order, violence, somehow or another, all these politicians tied back to the war, right? Because of the anti-war protests, that are becoming more violent, more aggressive, and are repressed by the National Guard, by the police, with brute force, right? This is creating in the American public mind, particularly white middle class America, the nation's going to hell in a handbasket caused by these student radicals. They're the ones who are violent. We want something done to stop it. And so Kennedy and McCarthy, Eugene McCarthy, are going to use this aspect of the war as well to blame it on Johnson. There had not been the war, there wouldn't be this incredibly violent civil disobedience. There wouldn't be the massive anti-war protest. This war is wrong. It's morally wrong. It's politically wrong. It's destroying the country. It's ripping the country apart. We've never been so divided, blah, 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 blah. And McCarthy and Kennedy used this. And the better politician in 68 campaign is Bobby. He's got the magic name. He's charismatic as hell. We've talked about this before, right? But McCarthy comes out in November of 67, so 2 months before the new year, and comes out and condemns Johnson's latest escalation, condemns the bombing, and announces, I'm going to run for president. I can't remember if there was a challenge. Last time there was a challenge to a sitting president within his own party. I'd have to go all the way back to Roosevelt and Taft in 1912. Roosevelt wanted to run again on the Republican ticket. The plutocrats said, no, Teddy, we don't want any more trust busting, buddy. No more regulation.
Which is funny because LBJ modeled his thing off the Roosevelt idea.
Of course, FDR, not Teddy.
Oh, FDR, sorry.
Yeah, and then the Republicans threw Teddy out. Teddy forms his own third party in 1912, the Bull Moose Party, but he loses badly. Republicans split. Woodrow Wilson wins. But here it is, 1968, and you've already got Eugene McCarthy. LBJ, however, did not take seriously McCarthy until the first primary, New Hampshire, 1968, early March of 68. To the shock of the nation, to the tremor of the Democratic Party, McCarthy wins 40-something% of the vote in the primary, enough to take 20 of 24 delegates. A couple days after, within a week or 10 days after, guess who throws his hat into the ring? Bobby Kennedy. Now, surprisingly, many in the Democratic establishment will just viciously lambaste Bobby. Bobby come lately. You chicken shit. That's one of the words used by one of McCarthy's supporters. You chicken shit, Bobby. You waited to test the waters, didn't have the courage to step out front like McCarthy did from the get-go and challenge Johnson. But now that you see that there's a possibility that you can unseat a sitting president based on this issue, now you're going to jump into the campaign. Oh, the McCarthy people just hated Bobby Kennedy for doing this. And rightly so, because once Bobby gets cranked up on that campaign trail, he will obliterate McCarthy. Right? It was close. The primaries were close. Bobby gets trounced in Oregon. Right? Taking California was a big victory, but his victory in California was only about 5 or 6 points. Right? He had taken Indiana, a few other states, but California gave Bobby the momentum to go to Chicago. There was another primary coming up, but had Bobby won that next primary. I forgot where it was. He had California behind him. New York obviously took New York. Um, and he would have probably prevailed at the convention. He would have won the nomination at the convention. This whole time, Johnson is just despondent and livid at the same time that this damn Kennedy has done this to me. He felt betrayed. You mentioned it. He was so loyal, never equivocated, always supported JFK. And now his brother turns around and is viciously going after him in the media, in his campaign speeches, crucifying Johnson for his wartime policies. It devastated Johnson. It devastated, which is sad.
Was there anybody else in Johnson's administration that felt some type of hate towards Bobby Kennedy, or just not disgust, I want to say, but just some type of not wanting him there, wanting to be around RFK? Because obviously RFK has a strong personality. I mean, he was there's I have a phone call which I think is the only time and only really evidence we have of you hear a lot about Alan Dulles being mad about the Bay of Pigs. And maybe that's why he killed JFK is usually one of the theories of why the CIA was behind it. I mean, you had the guy who gets fired by Kennedy, ends up investigating his death and not doing a job on it at all. Well, I have a phone call with RFK telling him with to Alan Dulles, telling Alan Dulles he needs to go down to Mississippi and he needs to go investigate these 3 kids that have gone missing. The
Yes.
and Alan Dulles says, "Why do you want me to do it?" And he goes, "Because I know you, Dulles." And Dulles starts laughing. He goes, "I'm still mad at you about the Bay of Pigs thing." And then, like, that's the first recording we have of Alan Dulles stating that he was mad. And he goes, "I'm not really one to hold a grudge for, too long." And he starts laughing. And then RFK was like, "Do you want to speak to the governor now?" And I have that phone call. Like I said, that's something we've just theorized and talked about based on the firing and the investigative process of the Warren Commission. But that's a very revealing phone call. But again, RFK, anybody in the administration of LBJ hating. I mean, I know there's a feud between Hoover. I have a phone call on that as well too between RFK and Hoover. But anybody like Dean Rusk, McNamara, I know Katzenbach was a fan, and I know LBJ tried to cozy up to Katzenbach to understand more about RFK.
Yeah. RFK, if all those individuals that you mentioned, most of them are carryovers from JFK's administration. They're they always liked Bobby, but they saw Bobby as just a ruthless little piece of shit sometimes. And he was ruthless. He was ruthless, Kenny, when it came to campaigning for John Kennedy in 60. 68, he tones himself down. He tones himself down, which makes him much more charismatic, much more appealing, right? You know, girls screaming at Kent and Bobby as if he was a rock star, all this. I remember this vividly. Um, but within Johnson's inner circle, those Texans like Conley hated Bobby Kennedy. McPherson was no big fan of Bobby Kennedy. George Reedy was not a big fan. Um, Moyers was, right? But Moyers is an interesting guy because Moyers saw Bobby for what he really was, really a ruthless politician. So Moyers liked Kennedy, would have supported Kennedy, of course, in 68, but he had reservations, right? Yarborough was no big fan of Bobby Kennedy, right? Humphrey, no big fan of Bobby Kennedy, right? And so with Kennedy and with Kennedy relative to Johnson, if there was any Kennedy that Johnson feared and hated the most, it was Bobby, right? He felt really duped and betrayed by Bobby. But in the back of his mind, Johnson knew that once Kennedy became that Senator Kennedy from New York, he would emerge in an opposition. He felt cheated, betrayed, because, We don't know for certain if John Kennedy told LBJ, look, well, do my 2 terms, torch will be passed to you. Did JFK say that to Johnson? I don't know. Right? No one knows for certain, right? Unless you have other information I do not have, which is possible.
A crystal ball.
Not crystal ball, yeah. But so Johnson, it's only reason Johnson took that position because he wanted to be president. If you look at the back of the 60 primaries, the only guy that won any other primaries was LBJ, right? So, I mean, he was a contender.
There's a weird phone call with I think it was after he broke the news to RFK that he wasn't going to choose him as vice president. Then he called. There's other phone calls like Dean Rusk, Robert McNamara, Bundy, and others where he's saying, "I'm not choosing you as a VP, just so it doesn't look like I'm pointing out Bobby single-handedly and just making him more upset." Which I'm like, he didn't have to do that, but he went out of his way and did that just to make those phone calls, maybe those recordings. Whether he's saving his own ass or whatever, I don't know. But then there becomes a point where he tries to contact Bobby the next day because he hasn't heard of him, and he's trying to schedule a meeting, and the call's like 30 seconds long, and it's just the operator trying to put him through, and he goes, sorry, he's not available. And he's like, and he's going off. And then next thing you know, he calls McBundy the same day within like 5 minutes of that call ending. And McBundy's like, sorry, I can't reach him either. I just tried. It's 18 seconds long because I can't reach him either. Calls McNamara. McNamara can't reach him. Calls like 5 or 6 different people trying to get a hold of RFK. Let me know when you get a hold of him. Calls them all the next day. They all say, nope, still haven't heard of him. So Bobby just kind of must have got upset and pissed off and went off. And the next thing you know, they're dealing with press stories and leaking of information to the press about certain things going on in the White House that only someone in the White House had to figure out. Johnson spent, I think, at least a couple weeks having the FBI investigate the White House to see if what leaks where these leaks were coming from, and a lot of people suspected Bobby. Again, this is another issue. Maybe that's where the Bobby Baker stuff you see start surfacing again. Mansfield was very quick to protect RFK, but he was very against Bobby Baker, not Bobby Kennedy. He was very against Bobby Baker. Actually, got rid of Bobby Baker. And LBJ was talking about Mansfield, and they were like, why don't you ask Mansfield if he can do this? And LBJ's like, you think if I had power over Mansfield, he wouldn't have gotten rid of Bobby? And they're talking about Baker. And that's the thing is like, again, we're trying to look into the administration. We're trying to figure out what's going on. It seems like RFK created more of a problem out of just anger for not being selected as VP because he thought he was owed it. And honestly, I think he might have been through some of the work that he's done. He did a lot of focus and he was in a pursuit of certain individual things that were more in line with his goals, of course. But it seemed like a lot of people, John McCone, I think I have the clip on it. He was the one that stated to the press and also testified that LBJ was saying that a lot of this stuff with Vietnam happened to be Kennedy's fault. LBJ got on the phone as soon as possible and said, that's John McCone. I never once blamed Kennedy for anything. He goes, I was there when Kennedy made all his decisions. I was there talking with Kennedy, and I talked to him about some of these things. And he was defending the fact that I can't believe these people are creating press stories about me. So I don't think it was just RFK isolated about LBJ. I think it was other varying factors that were trying to make that rift a little bit bigger. And then RFK, or John McCone's interview where he was talking about RFK, he was talking about Bobby's more conservative, probably would have been a little bit more better equipped than JFK in certain situations when it came to the presidency.
Without question.
Again, that's just an interesting little tidbit, but I like hearing these things because I think it brings bigger context. Everyone always kind of blames LBJ for being a bully and all these types of things. And I was like, well, he was sticking around two brothers who were talking about things in private and already kind of viewed LBJ in a certain way that LBJ necessarily, I don't have any recordings of him saying that the Kennedys were bad. I just have him getting mad at press stories coming out, and it turns out it might have been Bobby leaking those.
It's possible. Like I said, Bobby did not like Johnson. Just did not like him. JFK liked Johnson, respected Johnson.
He tolerated him.
Yeah, tolerated him. That's a better word. And respected Johnson's political prowess. Bobby just hated the guy across the bloody board. It's like, geez, which is, it's illogical in many ways. And you said something that triggered something for me. Relative to the war, The true dove in 68, the Democratic side, was McCarthy. It was not Kennedy. Sure, Kennedy was in favor of a negotiated settlement or the, excuse me, peace talks. He was in favor of the peace talks, but not that big fan of a negotiated settlement, and was ready to resume the bombing if North Vietnam did not agree to a negotiated settlement to respect the South. So he was still a hawk, still a cold warrior, right? Did not want a massive withdrawal, draw down troops immediately like McCarthy did. So Bobby simply politically used the war in anti-war sentiment, particularly to grab that youth vote, right? But he gave a speech at Notre Dame Bobby did during the campaign that harshly criticized draft dodgers and others, right? Which was surprised a lot of people. But the same in that same breath, same speech, he also encouraged students to continue to protest against the war, right? Here, Bobby realized that the blue collar vote, which was pro war, but certainly not, was anti war, but not like withdrawal. They were opposed to the war for different reasons. Bobby realized that the blue collar vote was still Democrat, which it was. It'll start to shift in 68. But if you look at Bobby's coalition, he still appealed to blue collar workers. He condemned the welfare state, which is endearing to blue collar workers. He was anti-war, but only anti-Johnson, anti-LBJ policies relative to the war. He wasn't necessarily anti-war, right? So Bobby would have he would have held a sufficient number of the blue collar war vote to possibly win the November election, right? Because when you look at by the time of his death, his assassination, he still had the blue collar vote lined up. He appealed to blue collar vote, Hispanics, African Americans, right, the marginalized, and that was his base. That's why he did so poorly in Oregon. Everybody's rich and white. He made the comment to somebody. Everybody's affluent. Look at these homes. None of my people are here, right? And he's correct. Oregon's still pretty damn white, right? And so he's not. That's why he gets trounced. When he goes to California, he's got his people when he wins.
What do you know about RFK and Douglas Dillon?
They were JFK and Dillon were closer. Bobby liked Dillon, wanted Dillon within the cabinet, with JFK's cabinet, because he's a Republican. And he's but again, Dillon, that Eastern establishment. What people don't realize is that through the 60s, even into the 70s, a little bit, the Democratic Eastern establishment and the Republican Eastern establishment, they all belonged to the same clubs, if you know what I mean. Okay? There's not much they don't disagree on. They're essentially moderate to conservative on a lot of issues, both Democratic establishment, Eastern establishment, the blue bloods, right? That's why Nixon, after he gets crushed, loses the governorship in California. What was that, 64? Yeah, 64. Where does he go? Nixon disappears, leaves California. Where does he go? New York. Joins one of the most powerful, prestigious law firms in New York, John Mitchell's. Why? He needs to cultivate and be part of that Eastern establishment. And it helps him in 68 because he emerges as a different breed of politician. Well, he's not. It's not the new Nixon. It's the old Nixon. He creates this illusion, but whatever.
Before I play some clips, I just want to get your take on what would you consider the overall understanding if you were going to kind of put it in a summary version of the RFK LBJ feud?
It was real. Number one. Number two, it emanated from Bobby more than from Johnson. Johnson was willing, not always willing, but willing in the first couple years of his presidency to try to bury the hatchet with Bobby. Bobby just refused. He was a hard man, Bobby. He really was. Very passionate. His hates were hates and his loves were loves. And Johnson, now, was it for political reasons that Johnson wanted to have those hatchets buried? More than likely, because he's a political animal. But I think there was a degree of humanity and sincerity involved in those overtures by Johnson, right? But Johnson sure as hell didn't want Bobby Kennedy carping at him in the Senate, going after his programs. Right? Luckily, Bobby couldn't go after much of those programs because he agreed with them and would have similar to what he would had implemented had he become president. So, but it was very personal. The personal was political and the political was personal. More so, ironically, in my view, for Bobby than for the LBJ. LBJ wanted Kennedy just to go away and let me have my vision. Let me have my moment in the sun. Let me put this great society forward. I'm going to run. We've talked about this. Johnson could have run in 68. Even if Bobby and McCarthy would have challenged him at the convention, which they obviously would have, the Democratic establishment, the Richard Daleys, and all those guys, they would never have wanted either Kennedy or McCarthy on that ticket. Never. Never. Right? And so McCarthy, Daley, sure, he will publicly mourn Bobby's assassination, a fellow Irishman, a fellow Catholic, blah, blah, blah. But Daley doesn't mourn too long, right? Within a matter of days of Bobby's assassination, McCarthy makes peace with Humphrey and tells Humphrey, I'm out of the race. I want my supporters to come to you. Jesus. Right? And this is why Johnson, in retrospect, Johnson should have not dropped out of the race. He should have sought.
I think he was tired and he just wanted to save his legacy at that point.
Exactly. And that opened the door. And Bobby probably would have won at 68. Right? Would I bet my paycheck? No, but a good percentage of it that Bobby would have won.
I'm gonna play some clips here. I'm trying to run through a lot of the stuff we said, but feel free after the clip's over if you wanted to comment or just give a little take if it was good or not, or if you have some opinions on it, feel free. This is the Bay of Pigs comment I found with an LBJ phone call. This is going to be on 6/23/64.
I think even if that's not true, the fact that you could report that, or I mean that you found it, just if President Johnson has to take some steps later on, and these things have such an effect across the country. It's not just Mississippi, but just have an effect across the country.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not just a local.
Why did you pick me for this?
Because I know you.
I've been a little mad at you, you know, a little bit on this Bay of Pigs book, but I forget that very easily.
Oh, well, I'm glad. But anyway, you know,
I don't stay angry long.
Yeah. Well, fine. But I think it could be, and I think the president feels it could be a big help.
Well, I'd do anything for the nation, you know,
Yeah.
any time. I never refused. I just have a little question of my...
Well, I'm sure you could do it.
Wise thing to do.
But
He wants to announce it tonight, the president wants to announce
Yeah, I think he'd like to do if it works out with Governor Johnson. Here he is back again.
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting. A lot of people bring up the Bay of Pigs thing and Alan Dulles, and I think that's the first time we have a recording of Alan Dulles even mentioning the Bay of Pigs or that he was upset about it. This next one I'm going to be playing is JFK or LBJ and Eisenhower on RFK, and this is on 8/27/65.
I'll tell you one thing I've got a problem with. I sure wished I could get some little help, and I guess I oughtn't to. I don't want to shove it, but I mentioned it once before. You remember you talked to me about a certain young man, and he's given me lots of problems. You told me about what he's doing in your foundation and in the other administration he was kind of running it. Now, he's getting ready to make a tour over the country, and he's shown a little unhappiness, and he says that I listen to Dirksen too much, and I listen to the other groups too much, and Bobby Kennedy.
Oh, yeah.
You remember you told me the first week you were in some of the problems that you thought I'd have with him and created.
The first day I saw him.
That's right, and so that's an accurate prediction. Now, he's getting ready to go off on a big tour to Latin America, and he's going to tell them that what we've done in the Dominican Republic and other things. I just wish there's some way that we could blow it up and puff it up before this other thing occurs.
Again, I think he's not talking about any hit mark on RFK, but he's talking about he wants to ruin RFK's trip to Latin America and he's trying to get ahead of the skid that's going on with RFK because he knows RFK is going to try and really slander him and get him out there. I thought that was interesting because he's trying his hardest not to mention Bobby, and then the next thing you know, he's just like, Bobby Kennedy. And then because Eisenhower doesn't know, he's just sitting there like, what, who?
Moreover, Eisenhower did not like the Kennedys either.
No.
He was okay with JFK. He was okay.
Well, they made up a little bit later on.
Yeah, but he initially did not like Bobby Kennedy. Didn't trust him.
This one is John Macy and LBJ. It's 2/3/67. It's about Bobby's office putting out these stories.
Okay, cool.
And making some enemies on our appointments. We've really got to watch it. Your poor old boss over here can't hire people to hurt him, and we'll do sometime. I don't know who you've got working for you, but I don't know. Some damn fool over there. Charlie Bartlett's had 2 or 3 columns. He's got another one now. He's the Kennedy structure. He gets his leaks, he and Alsop and Roland Evans, about 5 of them from Bobby's office. They put him on to something against the administration every day, and the last one was that the Bill Moyers group, Bobby's hiring 1 or 2 of them, so they kind of have some spies in, and that thing now, he says, that Macy called him in his office and told Gilligan that he was the only man that Boyd wanted, and that Gilligan hasn't been employed. Therefore, I ought to be shot for not doing it now. I don't know why I have to do this. Well, we're not smarter than that, but I guess we're not.
Obviously, he's talking about RFK hiring certain individuals and certain groups. Once he gets to Bill Moyers, he's talking about, okay, now we got some spies to see what Bobby's going to be planning and moving on there. Because obviously the feud at 67, there's big issues going on. It seems like the relationship, LBJ is not super concerned about saving it anymore. He's more about, I'm going to stop this right now. I'm tired of all this stuff going on. And we see this later on, like this clip I have right here, Bobby's influence into the press. It's with LBJ in 8/5/66.
Yeah, Califano.
With him, or
No, he said he had to rush up to make a vote. He'd call me as soon as he got off the floor.
Okay, now what we want to do is to get all of our brain trusters busy. Bobby's got him, and Bobby's got Alsop and Ben Bradley, and
Yeah, that was...
Roland Evans and Drew Pearson and about 7. That's the way he operates. So we got to operate the same way. We want to get ours together, tell Weaver that they say he's unimaginative and he is too slow and that he's not for the Negro and the Negro's getting where he hates him. That's what they say about Weaver. Then tell this Bob Woods that he's supposed to be a great guy, but now Bobby Kennedy and this committee, Abe Revikoff and the rest of them are going to point out they got to do another traffic safety job on it. So you ought to get them with Gardner and with Wirtz quickly and get them to get their statements prepared, and they ought to go in and say if the Senate had acted on these recommendations, and then just take the 7 things that we've done. Say we can't do it all today, but if we'll do them now, instead of getting into this whole big problem, what caused it? We've gone into all this stuff, what caused it.
What's interesting in those last 2, you get a sense that after Kennedy is elected, becomes senator, right? Johnson becomes increasingly, I don't want to say paranoid, but increasingly obsessed with Bobby Kennedy, certain that he's out to destroy his presidency. If you read between the lines, it's strong to me. It's strongly intimated in these conversations. The more obsessed LBJ is becoming with Bobby Kennedy's, the threat he poses to his administration. And there's a degree of legitimacy to that, I think.
Now, these are like 4 or 5 minute conversations, obviously. I haven't chopped the bits they talk about RFK, but it seems like through all of them, the 15-minute conversations about Vietnam and all, everything at the last ending ends with RFK, and everything's RFK right at the end. And I go, he's very concerned, and I think it's because he has to slip it in and get people's opinion on it. That's why he went to Katzenbach and tried to get, what's Bobby's deal? You know, give me a breakdown of it. And RFK kind of explained a little bit. I mean, Katzenbach explained a little bit. This one I had here was 3/17/66. It's Nobody Stopping Bobby. It's LBJ and Nicholas Katzenbach.
Katzenbach.
What do you think? You think that he thinks the Texas establishment is tried to keep him from being senator, or doesn't want him to be senator?
No, I don't think so, Mr. President. I think it's well, I don't really know what I do think.
I'll tell you what Bob McNamara thinks. Bob McNamara thinks that it's politically wise to be not to be identified with this administration. Get away from him. Now, my judgment is that if I'm president, I think I'm going to have something to do at conventions. I don't care how many things. I have things every day that I could move on them if I wanted to. I could move on Teddy in Boston. I could move on his boy Henry over here. Hell, a fella called up here last week with a complaint that he had been called by Henry to shake him down for a governor's race in Tennessee. And it's a damned outrage, and he's called him on the telephone.
I got this one. This was LBJ talking about Bobby and Douglas Dillon.
Doug Dillon?
Yeah.
Okay.
With Robert Anderson, 7/30/64.
Doug Dillon, right.
Well, I'm a bit bad.
I wonder why they're so close.
Well, I don't know, but I told you a long time ago that when I was up there in his apartment, the fellow walked in and had the key to the apartment.
Yeah. What's in there? Run that by me again.
Well, when I went up to see Doug, I was sitting there talking to him about his business, and this fellow had a key to the door, and he walked in.
You mean in New York or something?
Yeah, in New York. He got an apartment up on Fifth Avenue, headed all to the side. And he asked me to come to see him, and I went up there, and I went to see him. And I was sitting there in his living room, and somebody had a key and walked in, and there was the man. This was before you announced your budget. It was in December. And he just walked in the door. I don't know.
Well, I think his strategy now is going to be, I don't believe he'll take us to convention,
But I think he'll sulk and sickle and hope that we are defeated, and maybe contribute a little bit without getting caught. So we don't have the machinery and things like that. And I've got the Negroes now where they agree to behave themselves for a while, and if he doesn't incite them, we get them stirred up again.
Yeah.
Again, interesting.
Yeah, very. These are great clips, conversations.
But I've been through about 800 hours of LBJ tapes. I like it. I find it enjoyable. It's actually kind of interesting just to get new insight to it. This was LBJ and Clark Clifford breaking the news.
Oh, my man, Clark Clifford. What year is this?
I think it's 65 or 66.
Okay. Clifford is an interesting guy.
Hold on, I think I have another one with Clifford possibly. No, it must have been 64 because we have not choosing RFK as VP. All right, I'll play this one and then I'll play the one by Dean Rusk.
He was upset about New York last night. He's got the lady thinking about going to the convention, and he put that out yesterday, and he thinks that most of the delegations are for him, and this is the thing he wants more than anything else in his life. If he's denied it, it'll be very cruel and so forth.
Yes, sir.
You have any feeling about whether all that, he also wants to know who it is and select it. What reaction I ought to take on those 2 points?
Yes, I have a very definite reaction on both of them. On the first, I have believed all along that all you do is tell him.
Yeah.
Now, I think it appropriate and courteous to give some reasons for your decision, but you are not asking him at any time for his reaction. I would not get into that. You're calling him over because you owe him the courtesy to tell him you have reached a final and irrevocable decision, and you thought he ought to know it first.
Yeah.
Now, on the second point, I would not tell him that you have made any selection. All you've told him is that he is no longer in the list for the reasons that you have given, and I would not make any reference to the fact that you have reached any conclusion.
Again, LBJ called a bunch of people multiple times to try and get a good way of breaking this news to Bobby, and the best way he thought he could do it was by telling everyone else and making the whole cabinet members nobody's getting selected. So again, nobody really wanted it. Dean Rusk didn't care for it. McNamara wasn't hurt by it. A lot of people weren't hurt by it, but it just was really to tell Bobby no. And he didn't want Bobby to feel he was saying, no, he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to. Maybe he was worried about RFK's revenge or how he would retaliate. But I don't know LBJ to be afraid of a lot of people. And I think
he's not afraid.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it was just the courtesy of Bobby because he does have respect for the family. He called JFK, or no, he called Teddy Kennedy, he called Teddy Kennedy. Some of the Kennedy family told McNamara to tell Jackie, tell McNamara to tell Kennedy's family that he's very sorry for the loss of their son, JFK. He did the same thing when RFK died. I have that phone call when he called Teddy. It's very sad.
Yes.
But he's very, very heartfelt when it came to, I'm sorry this had to occur or this thing happened. And he called up James Rowley that day, said, Secret Service protection on all presidential candidates. He goes, what do we do if your bill hasn't passed for this to happen? He goes, I don't give a damn. Put it through. All presidential candidates are going to be protected. Don't worry about the bill. I'll handle it. And that's what that's the LBJ side a lot of people like, is because he goes able to get so much done so quickly because he's motivated.
You also saw something else there with Clifford. Why LBJ increasingly on so many issues, the last guy he would talk to before he'd make a decision was Clark Clifford. He was probably the LBJ's most trusted outside advisor. And that's why Clifford became Secretary of Defense, replacing McNamara in 1967. And that to me, that's a great clip that shows that kind of relationship. He leaned heavily on Clifford. And Clifford was very loyal to Johnson.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hit play on that.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
My finger accidentally hit it when I was putting my hand down.
That's okay.
This one was LBJ not choosing RFK as VP, and then Dean Rusk telling him he will retaliate, 7/30/64.
If they ask me why I eliminated the cabinet, I think I'm going to say, well, I carefully considered all these men that I served with here, and I didn't feel that I would want to ask or I would want to recommend any of them leave their present assignments for which they're so well equipped.
Yeah, well, that's fine.
Well, you got any better thought of how to point it up?
No.
I think if I just point up one, I think it looks like I'm kind of playing it tough and jumping on somebody and picking on them or something.
Well, it would also clarify things for some other people, like Adley, for example.
Yeah.
And he might think...
And he's got a club going for him this morning.
Yeah.
Well, you think it's all right then?
This is fine, and the only question that you would know how to judge better than I is whether this would stimulate an organized movement for one of the names on there.
Well, it might, but I've already told him, and
I suppose if that's going to happen, you have to deal with it in any event.
Have to be ready for it now,
yeah.
And I am. I'm prepared. I don't want to serve unless I can serve whoever I want to.
Yeah.
I'm not about to.
Yeah. All
okay.
Right.
Thank you.
A lot.
I thought it was cool that I put that little thing in the bottom part there, text, so people have some context to what's going on if they're not new to or if they're new to the whole history aspect of RFK and LBJ. But he campaigned for RFK when he was going to New York, so after he left his administration, and it did include that maybe he was happy that he was have RFK out of his administration. But at the same time, he didn't have to do that. He could have he was supporting Bobby in some way, but he didn't want the animosity, but he couldn't forgive Bobby for a lot of the shit that he was doing. And again, it was back and forth on both. You heard LBJ saying, we'll play even. I'll go to sabotage you too. So again, I just think it adds more context to the whole relationship. Now, this was LBJ and Ted Kennedy on 6/5/68. As you know, that's when Bobby was killed.
Ted?
Yes, Mr. President, what you very good for?
Well, we're terribly grieved, Ted. I don't know what we can do, but anything we can, we want to. And it's a horrible, tragic thing. We have put a detail around the families, and we don't have authority, but we're going to ask the Congress to give us that authority. In the meantime, we're assuming it. We don't want them to think we're snooping, though, and that MPs around are for any purpose except to protect them. But I placed a call for all of you, and they happened. I told them to get Pierce Salinger, get you, or get Steve Smith, or to get Ted. And they got him. And if you'll explain to them here what we are doing, so they won't. The Secret Service man will be in charge. Under the present law, they can just cover Ms. Kennedy, ex-presidents, and the president. We are extending that to all candidates for the presidency and their families. And the Secret Service take charge, and they'll use defense and justice people until we get authority, and we're going to try to get it today. Well, it's a horrible, terrible thing, and we grieve with you, and I wish there's something we could do. And I don't want to bother you, but when you talk to your mother, please tell her that our thoughts are with her and our prayers with you too, Ted.
Nobody sees that side of LBJ that gets mentioned.
No, rarely. That's good. It's very, very good.
This one changes after Bobby's death. It's the LBJ and Ted Sorensen call. It's 6/5/68 again when Bobby died.
We're very grieved, and I don't know who to talk to, but I wanted to call you and tell you that our prayers are with you, and I hope that you will take the appropriate action to convey that information to the family that you might be in contact where it's not a problem. I don't want to be, I know they'd all want to talk, but I don't want to be bothered. Second, we have asked that a detail be placed with each presidential candidate. We don't have any authority to do it, but I thought we ought to, and we'll have the families covered here and the candidates wherever they are. We had asked confidentially the Congress to do that. We didn't want to attract attention to it by a lot of publicity to get every crackpot to taken care of. We'd asked them to put legislation on the appropriation bill. And they had the hearings, and they were agreeable to doing it. They're going to report the bill next week. It's legislation on appropriation bill. We'd have a problem. So we were going ahead and do it, and I just went ahead and took this action. I would like for somebody, whoever's watching the children and things, to know that we're not trying to spy on them. But there will be some MPs. I've asked the Defense Department, and the Secret Service doesn't have enough people. There'll be a Secret Service people in charge, but they'll have under them some MPs and other police and whoever they.
And then these last ones I wanted to play were what you kind of mentioned. Not this one, but the next three, about them never using LBJ, how the Kennedy administration viewed LBJ, and then LBJ saying, "I've always supported the Kennedys." This was an interesting one. These next four clips are going to be from Malcolm Kilduff's oral history interview. He stated it was Robert Kennedy that told him to be sworn in, which a lot of people just don't believe that Robert Kennedy would do that. But I don't know, it makes a little bit of sense to me. Because I think RFK at this point, everyone's in shock. You don't know what's going on. And I think LBJ was more concerned about getting out of there because he thinks he's going to be hit next. And I think RFK was like, you need to be sworn in. There needs to be this thing that happens just so people can see it.
They want the transition. They want calm. They want assertion. They want to see.
There needs to be comfortability when your president gets shot.
Exactly.
Here's the
assurance that everything's going to be okay.
At that time, he had talked with Robert Kennedy.
Johnson, you mean?
Right. Johnson had talked to Robert Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy's advice to him was that he be sworn in
this
Dallas.
Person holding this little microphone?
So then they
that's
had
Malcolm
to go and find someone who could swear him in.
This was the kind of stuff you were doing before Mrs. Kennedy got back. Is that right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So
because she was there when he was sworn in.
That's right. So by that time, they then located Judge Sarah Hughes and got her on her way, I guess, in a police car out to the airport. In the meantime, they brought the president's body back. They'd gotten him in a casket. And
was there some kind of problem about Texas wanting to control the body?
Oh yeah, the coroner there had attempted to hold the body for autopsy.
Which he should have done, because he even stated, if you let this body leave Dallas, there are going to be a lot of theories and issues that go on with this autopsy, and was the boy right or not?
He was, 100%.
They never used LBJ.
Yeah.
That was a failure. Here, the Kennedy White House had an ideal opportunity through the proper use, and I hate to use that word, but it's true, the proper use of the vice president as a member of the Senate Club to get things that they could never get done on their own, and they didn't get done on their own. Major civil rights legislation, for instance, didn't go through until Johnson. And how did Johnson do it? He did it by going up to the Hill and sitting down at night with these guys and bumping heads together.
Would go up.
Oh yeah, he'd go up there. He'd go up there and sit down over a bottle of bourbon. Kennedy didn't do that. Kennedy let his congressional staff do that, and they resented it. The members of the club, because they still regarded John Kennedy as an upstart.
True, very true.
This one's about how Kennedy's administration viewed LBJ.
I think, and I've always felt that some of the Kennedy staff felt that Johnson was only a means to an end when it came to the election.
Getting
the Southern vote. And that therefore he really didn't have to be contended with.
For 4 years, you just
that's right, but
occupied elsewhere.
That's right. Make him the head of the Space Committee, have him the head of this committee, and make him the chairman of that committee, and send him to India or wherever. He went all over the place.
I got you.
At a minute's notice.
And so maybe undervalued his legislative ability.
I think that the Kennedy White House totally undervalued the value to the effectiveness of their programs in not using Lyndon Johnson more than they did. But you had your legislative staff was mostly all people who'd been with Kennedy on the Hill.
And then this last one about it's Robert McNamara and LBJ on 11365. A lot of this came after the Manchester book, which honestly I think Teddy Kennedy and Jackie were the only ones that lawsuited and went down there. RFK, when he found out that there was incriminating stuff on his brothers when he went down there, but he was very happy and actually wanted to try and get some of the press, like the Washington Star and others, to pick up the story about the Manchester book. And then Manchester was offered, I think, $600,000 to sell the story. And originally RFK just wanted that to be 4 newspapers. It turned out to be a lot more than 4 newspapers, and this is when it became a problem. And LBJ had to reach out to Jackie about it, and then there was a lot of issues. And this is one of the things where he's dealing constantly for like a month straight just with Manchester's book and some things that came out, and he's rebuttaling it and telling Bill Moyers and others that he needs to go out to the press and release these statements. But here's the McNamara and LBJ.
Yeah, Cone didn't tell me, and so Russell didn't. I don't know who. Must have been some newspaper man that suspected. Somebody told me, though, that he came out and discussed that. But I think that if any of this crowd is in your vicinity or in your associates' vicinity, I think what you ought to say to them is this, that I came into Vietnam. I went out there in early '61. I was permitted to make any recommendation I want to at any time, and I assume full responsibility for everything and don't ask anybody else to take it, including President Kennedy. And during his lifetime, whatever he did, I was for. And in his death, it's my complete responsibility, and I don't shove it off on anybody else. And that's that.
Again, JFK took the rap for the Bay of Pigs. Johnson's sitting here taking everything, the Vietnam stuff. I never blamed it because McCarthy made a statement about LBJ saying that it was Kennedy, and LBJ never made that statement. And LBJ is now sitting there telling everybody, no, I take full responsibility for what happened. Even though years after the fact, LBJ is gone, we got McNamara in interviews, Mansfield in interviews, Dean Ruskin interviews, and others saying that we were giving Johnson the wrong information. Goes back to what George Reedy said. George Reedy said that you send 4,000 troops to Vietnam, those 4,000 troops dead. What are you going to do as president? Put yourself in that position. Nobody can imagine it. You're going to send 5,000 more. You're going to send 10,000 more. You're going to send 20,000 more because now you have to fight in honor of these troops. He says, you know what happens when that goes? You listen to the government. What does the government do? The government injects their opinion the first time. Anything after that is in 100% support of what the president says. So Johnson says Vietnam. Everyone else is giving him support on his decision to go to Vietnam.
Precisely. Yeah. Sad but true, which is tragedy of LBJ.
We ran through a lot on this episode, a lot about JFK, LBJ, and RFK. I appreciate your time always, Mr. Moretta, to have these types of discussions, and hopefully those clips were interesting for you as much as they were for me.
Very.
Is there a place where people can find any of your links where your books will be? I know we have previous ones I could put in the description below, but if you had anything you just want to tell people.
Nah, I'm good. Same sites. They're all good still.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Mr. Moretta. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank, and stay tuned for our next episode.